What's up, galactic friends, and welcome to a quick tutorial on using Firebase with React Native and especially Firebase Authentication with Expo Router. So you've been asking about a couple of times already, and here we go. So I will walk you through the steps of using Firebase, creating the project, setting it up correctly, and then using the native Firebase, the React Native Firebase module this time, not just the JavaScript SDK as we did before, but going a step further. And there are a few things you need to watch out for. So let's get started. I already took the first step, which is creating a new Expo application using create Expo app, and I used the default template. Now, there are a couple of things we want to install. So the first line is for the React Native Firebase package. This package is, well, it's a wrapper around the native Firebase SDKs. So this gives you usually more power. You can use stuff like deep links, analytics, crashlytics, which you can't really use in a great way with the JavaScript SDK. The usage with the JavaScript SDK is totally fine if you just want authentication, Firestore, and that stuff, but this is a bit more complicated, and I thought that's right, that's fitting for us. So we install React Native Firebase /app, which is like the main module, and then React Native Firebase /auth. And I can also do a little drawing here because we need authentication. You can imagine if you need storage, if you need dynamic links, if you need Firestore, you would install these according packages. So you can also check this out, of course, if you go to GitHub. For React Native Firebase, you should find down here all the different packages, analytics, app check, distribution, authentication, Firestore, cloud function, whatever you might need. And then you have to separately install them. At the same time, you can also now go ahead, or maybe let's finish one thing. It's my ADHD probably. Let's install the second thing, which is Expo build properties. Why do we need this? We need to make a few changes to our app.json if we're in a React, in an Expo project. If you're using this with a bare React Native project, which I anyway don't really recommend at this point anymore, there are different things you want to do. In our case, we are using the config plugins available from React Native Firebase to make changes to our native project. So we do have to make a pre-build of our Expo project. We can't use this with Expo Go, but this is not a problem at all, trust me. So go to your app.json file, and then check for the plugins section down here. Okay, it already says Expo Router, Expo build properties. There are two things we need to bring in now. First, we're gonna bring in the React Native Firebase app and Firebase Auth as a plugin here. And then additionally for Expo build properties, the whole reason we installed this was to define something. So make it an array. I still don't really like the syntax here of like having an array and then the plugin is the name and then comes like the options. I really don't know why. But anyway, what we want to do in here is say iOS. And for iOS, we want to use frameworks and then set this to static. All right. What does it do? Well, if we supply it like this, once we do an Expo pre-build, this plugin will set under iOS a specific use frameworks field to static, which is required for the Firebase SDK. All right, this is the reason why we need it, and this includes the native Firebase SDKs later. Cool. Additionally, two more things. I highly recommend you specify for iOS a bundle identifier. So let me bring in mine here. Let's just do something like this. Galaxies, let's just call it Firebase. And for Android, you want to do the same. So find your Android entry and specify galaxies. Also, let's call this just Firebase. Okay, for the moment, this is enough. If we now do a build, so if we do npx expo pre-build, this will generate the native iOS and Android folders. And we see we get a little issue here. Why? Path to Google Service Info plist is not defined. Please specify this. Okay, so now because we're using the native SDKs, it's expecting a sort of different configuration than you might be used if you use the Firebase web JavaScript SDK. And we need to generate this. So let's call this my Expo app. And let's hit continue. I don't want analytics, and I will create a new Firebase project in my console. While this loads, quick note, I do have a full course on galaxies.dev about using React Native with Expo Router. We're building a nice little chat application in this course, so go check it out, galaxies.dev. You can test drive for free, and then you become a member to enjoy this course. Go check it out. Contains a lot about Firestore usage, uploading files as well. Okay, now let's continue with your Firebase project. To correctly use this, you need to add native apps. So click on iOS and Android here. I'm gonna start with this. And use your bundle identifier. So my bundle identifier was this. Let's copy this over. Whatever, my iOS app, doesn't really matter. We don't really need the App Store ID right now. We can now generate this and download the config file. And maybe we're gonna just do this for the moment. So okay, please just download this. Okay, we did. And now I could probably drop that here in my project. But what we're gonna notice is if I run the command again for pre-build, it still complains. First of all, we need to specify the path to that file in our app.json as well. So go to your app.json. Under iOS, you can add a new entry for the Google services file, which is at Google service info plist at the top or the root of my project. I just have to rename it, but then we should be fine. While we add it, we can add the entry for Android as well. Usually they name the file Google services.json, so that's what we're gonna find. Now let's run it again, and we still get a problem, but this one is different. And this is the one I stumbled upon and had to figure out, so I wanna tell you what's going on. The problem here is that React Native Firebase auth failed to parse your info plist. Are you sure it is a valid plist file with a reverse client ID? This is the problem. So the config plugin of React Native Firebase expects this reverse client ID field. And at this time recording, it is not generated by Firebase and not included automatically. So let me show you how you can solve that. First, let's do an Android app as well, just for the sake of this video. com.galaxies.firebase, Android app. And then we can already specify, but let's do this a little bit later. So register that one. So we are on the same level as iOS with our configuration here now. By the way, there's an open issue, or is it closed? It's actually closed. It shouldn't be closed because this is still an issue. However, one solution to this, to make sure that your reverse client ID is included, is to go to authentication. We need to enable this service anyway. So click get started. And we're gonna include email password for the moment because we wanna have email sign up. But I also wanna add a new provider, and I now wanna use the Google provider, and I want to enable this. Okay, I will select my ID and hit save. This will most likely trigger something. Let's wait for it. You can also do this in like the Google API console and configure authentication. But now it already says download and replace the latest file. So for iOS, I can now download my updated Google service info plist file and drop that into my project. And if we compare this, we now have a reverse client ID included, which we previously didn't have. So we'll remove that one and then continue with this file. Additionally, for Android, we need to provide a SHA-1 fingerprint, and we can specify this here. Now, how the heck do I get this? Well, if you're using a local build, you can do it like this. So let's close this. We can go into my Android folder, and I can just run Gradle, and then signing report. This will print out a bunch of information. Most of it is completely unnecessary, and you need to find the right information. If you're using EAS, you can get this with EAS credentials. with that command, you should get like the signing. It's basically the signing key for your APK or your AA, what's the bundle format? AAPT, whatever. So this is just my local way because I usually build my apps locally. As you can see, I got a lot of stuff in here, but most importantly is my debug key. So this is how I would build my app for Android locally with Expo pre-built. And I want to copy that fingerprint here. You can also use the other one, I think. And then go to my settings for the Android app and add a fingerprint. Let's save. And then my Android app has the fingerprint. I can now safely download my Google Services JSON file, place it at the root of my project, and then check out. We should now have a reverse client ID, which wouldn't be included otherwise in the first place. So this is the first step in configuring the React Native Firebase module. I can now go back a folder up and do my npx expo pre-build, which now hopefully generates the iOS and Android folder, and everyone is happy. Cool, that is the first step in just getting started. Now we can talk about the implementation. So let's run npx expo run iOS. So I want to run this on my iOS simulator here at the side. We have enabled authentication, so we should be fine with this. Which means we can write some code. Only problem is that the default template from Expo at this time comes with a lot of stuff inside that I don't want. So I will run the scripts reset project script, which basically gets rid of all these things. And I will also, to make it easier for you, remove all the folders that we don't need. So we really just have our app folder. That's all we need at the moment. In the background, this is building. By the way, you could also build for Android, of course. That won't make a difference. Our approach now should work just fine. Let's bring up the index. Let's bring up the layout. Where's my index? Here it is. Okay. And we can write some code. In the layout, we specify my first screen. That is in general fine. On the index screen, we now want to build our login and registration form. What we need to do for this is, well, a couple of things. Let's check it out. First of all, we need input fields. So we need state for email, password, and loading. So let's bring this in from React. Then we might define some functions. So we might have like sign up equals whatever. And then we might have const sign in equals something. Cool. Okay, now we can focus on the view. Let's put in some styling. So bring in my style sheet import. And then I have two stylings to go with our view. I have a little container styling which will just center everything. So instead of using the inline styles, I will now use container, probably styles.container, thanks. And at the same time, I want to have a keyboard avoiding view. Let's set the behavior to padding. This just makes sure that if you have input fields on your view, you're not covering these with the keyboard that comes up at the bottom. This might need some tweaking here and there, especially if you like images and different stuff going on your, what is this? This is actually pretty good. At this point, my pre-build is also coming up, so I want to open up my app and it should hopefully show something at least. Yeah, well, a blank index page, that's good. Here we go. Copilot gave us a nice text. We got a text input. With my styling, we have the value set to email, on change text. I would call my set email, auto capitalize to none, and the keyboard type set to email address. That's pretty nice. We could also add a placeholder equals email, exactly. And then we got a second one for text. We got a secure text entry here. We can also set the placeholder to password. And once we hit save, we got a problem because we also need these buttons. Good. This is our landing page. Of course, it's not a beauty, but this is not what it's about today. So first of all, I would like to sign up. Or actually, let's wrap these buttons in a little logic. So initially I had something like this. If we're loading, we're just gonna render a loading indicator here in place, and otherwise we have our 2 buttons. Really nothing too crazy. So now for the sign up, we can bring in the auth package from React Native Firebase /auth. And then we can, if we want to, wrap it in a little logic. So this is how I would do it. I would first set my loading to true before I start any kind of operation. Then I would use auth.createUser with email and password, and passing in just the email and the password. In previous code where you use the JavaScript SDK, you also have like an auth instance that you pass in as the first parameter. Don't mind, not needed here. Additionally, you can also import from /Firebase app the Firebase error, and then cast it down here. It just gives you some sort of type safety. And then I would set the loading to false. Actually, is this how it works? I would probably put this in a finally block. And then wrap it up. I'll probably do it like this. Okay, for the registration, this is actually the sign up, exactly. For the sign in, it's pretty much the same flow. You can just use set loading, make sure you're using async for your function to use await, and then call the auth package, sign in with email and password, pretty much the same, this time just signing in instead of creating it. Again, I would probably wrap this with a finally block to update my loading. You see, we don't have any logic for routing in here. This is because most of this will be handled in our layout file in a second. For the moment, maybe let's set this up because this is quite interesting to see. So what I would like to set up is first of all the basics for Firebase. I want to have state here in my layout whether we're currently initializing. So this is important because if you're using something like the Firebase SDK, or if you use Clerk or something else, this usually has like an initializing state in the beginning, and you want to wait for that. Then we want to use a use effect block here. And what we're going to do inside is gonna run first time, so empty dependency array. We will now create a subscriber, and we're gonna subscribe to the auth package on auth state changed. And to on auth state changed, we can pass a callback or a listener here. So we need to create a little additional function for that. Let's do it. Let's call this on auth state changed. And this one gets a user. Actually, we got the typing right. So this is of Firebase auth types.user and makes our life a lot easier. I'm gonna put in a little lock here for the user, and then we're gonna set our user. And if we're still in the initializing phase, which is initially set to true, we would then at this point, when we get the first result from the onAuth state changed, we would get true. And we would now pass this to our function here. So let's copy this and pass it in here as the observer. Now, to prevent memory leaks, you can use the return function of use effect and then return that subscriber, which will handle the unsubscription in the end. And with that in place, we also get the first lock because our onAuth state change is triggered whenever the app starts. We get the first result, it is null. We can also use this to our advantage now. So let's say we are still in the initializing phase. So if initializing is true, we would probably do something like this. We're gonna have a view with just an activity indicator. It probably, so it's really fast. I could just maybe remove that. Then we would see it in action. So then we'd see like for a super millisecond, this would show up until our initializing is done, but we don't really notice it in production now. Cool, with that in place, we got some logs, so let's create a user. I'll just do Simon at galaxies.dev and a super secure password. Let's try login first. Okay, nice, we get an error, we get an alert with this generic message. You could probably do something better, but That's not our problem right now. We want to create an account, and then we get an alert, check your emails, and immediately afterwards we see this log here. Why is that happening? Usually if you use Firebase and if you use the registration, it will automatically or instantly sign in the user. This can actually be complicated if you create like an admin app where the admin creates user and then you're signed in. I saw this problem before. You can overcome that somehow, but I forgot how. If you got questions about this, let me know in the comments. But that means we've created our user and we should be able to find the user right here. There we go, right here in Firebase. Cool, Superbase, wherever, in some kind of database. Now, with that in place, it's best when you laugh about your own jokes. I can already see the comments. Anyway, we have the logic now to create a user and to log in that user. Now let's make something out of this by creating an inside area. I will just do a new file. I will call this in the auth folder _layout.ts React Native functional export layout. So I just want to have a super simple stack layout inside here in an auth group. So we're grouping together our stuff. Usually you're going to see something like a tab bar layout also as a subfolder in here. But for now, just like let's go with this. And let's create one additional file. I will call this like home.tsx. Page. Okay. Now, we can go back to our top layout file because in here we know if we do have a user or if we're not having a user. And we can use this now to tie in with Expo Router. So we're going to bring in the use router and use segments hook from Expo Router. So make sure you import that correctly. And then we're going to set up another use effect block. Use effect, almost like this. Well, actually not at all. I want to make this dependent on user and initializing. So if we're still initializing, then I just want to return early. Now, I want to distinguish between users that try to access the login page and users that try to access something in my auth group. So sometimes you're gonna see also people have like a public group up here where they put the login and the registration and like FAQ pages. That's also possible. So I want to check if the user is trying to navigate to something in the auth group. For this, we can now check the segments at index 0 if that's equal to auth. Make sure if you're using like more subfolders or you name this differently, you would have to replace this. Now, if we already have a user at this point and the user is not in the authentication group, that means the user is actually signed in the background, but still sees the login. There's not really any use in that. So in that case, I would call router replace for my inside area. But another case would be if I don't have a user and the user is trying to access something in the auth group. In that case, I would route the user back to the login page so the user can see this page again. And actually, this is the whole magic of using Expo Router, authentication, and Firebase, okay? So we see a little problem up here because our inside area does have a bar up there. That's no problem. You could say like for the whole auth group, we could set the header shown to false. I have some other videos on like all the things you can do with Expo Router and tabs. Just check out the different videos here on the channel. But we see if I refresh, I will be brought instantly to the login at the inside page right now. And now on this page, I can just do a little update. So let's put in a button here from React Native. And then I want to bring in my auth package. And with the auth package, I can now do something like title sign out. And on press, I want to call auth.sign out. Here we go. Button, is that a problem? Element button has no closing tag. Yes, please. And if I hit the sign out, I'm immediately brought back. You see, no logic in here. Everything is handled in our topmost layout file. And after the sign out, I always forget like where my drawing is. After the sign out, we get the notification. Come on, where's my drawing? I sometimes just forget the shortcut. Like my brain just snaps out and I don't know the shortcut anymore. Okay, so this is here, and now I completely forgot about it again. All right, so if I hit reload here, and if caps lock is not enabled, it loads again. On auth state changed is null. Let's do a quick login. Simon@galaxies.dev. Log in. Voila, I'm inside, and in the inside area, I'm gonna also simply access the user by using the auth package, and then getting the current user. And then simply saying something like text, welcome, well, that's the hardest part, welcome back, user, and we should have a nice completion here, yes. And voila, welcome back with my email. So again, sign out, back to login. So with that, we have finished our React Native Firebase authentication with Expo Router. Actually, the integration between Firebase authentication and Expo Router is quite easy once you understand it. Just use the on-auth state changed, manage that state, and then check it in combination with the segments or the path of your Expo Router and the link the user tries to access if a certain user is allowed to access a URL or not. And then you can like build all your inside layouts behind that authentication or behind a paywall. If you enjoyed the video, also check out the full React Native Firebase course on galaxies.dev, and don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button on this channel for fresh videos every week. Oh, and by the way, if you want to dive deeper into the pre-build stuff and what we did, check out a video here that I did before about all the ways how you can build your Expo application locally, EAS, everything included. Check it out, it's pretty nice, and I will catch you in the next one. So until then, happy coding, Simon.